Hello and welcome again to the Swindle. Doing another Henry Beresford run, and we're going to play for about 25 minutes because while the really long runs are super duper cool and I like doing them, and that's generally how I play this game, they are also incredibly hard to upload. It takes me basically literally all day, during which my computer in general can't be used for other things, and that sucks. So anyway, the purpose of these videos broadly is to show them being played with a fairly naturalistic air to them. Like, you don't need to, like, you might notice if you watch me playing that there's not a lot of, like, special weird techniques. I'm not doing a lot of, like, you know, oh, this needs preamble and testing and whatnot. It's just, I throw myself at it and I play. So that means that anything you see me doing is usually the byproduct of just emergent play. There will be some techniques, and I will try and describe anything really weird I'm doing before I do it, but there's still some stuff where I'm just winging it. Anyway, so we have well, I've been trying to make sure I do something to liven this up rather than just sit here talking on my own to nothing. And until I get good video editing software that makes it easy and convenient to do otherwise, I'm going to just record and play at the same time. But ooh, that was risky, by the way. That was a mistake and a correction and a bit of good luck. But anyway, so what I've been doing is taking some conversation starter questions and just diving into them. So this time the question I got asked was, "What's the last movie you saw?" And I think the answer to this is Moana. I think. It's possible I've seen another one since. I don't watch a lot of movies in general. I do like more long-form serialized stuff. It's weird. I think I would like movies more because I tend to like media that generally just gets the hell out of its way quickly. So if a story is, 70 minutes, I'm very happy for it to be done in 70 minutes. Anyway, though, Moana was probably the most recent movie I've seen. And what I've seen of it yielded a whole bunch of really interesting discussions and a very interesting cultural divide. Because one comparison I kept hearing being made between Moana and other movies was Pocahontas. And Pocahontas is a really weird movie, more so than people seem to give it credit, because it's really easy to look at Pocahontas now, as it is, with 21st century, literally 21st century perspectives, and being able to gather together all the information about the people who are making it and analyze it as a piece of media right now, as an object that exists and was made with the level of information we have available to us right now. But it's a lot harder to look back at the context of the time, and I'm not saying it's okay because of the context. That's a very common complaint you'll hear, especially amongst Bible apologists. But it's very easy to look back at the context of the time, and when understanding that this was where this was coming from, see what it was trying to do. I've complained in the past that Legend of Korra is a series that is good. That has failings that are because of extrinsic things. That the things in Korra that aren't very good are a byproduct of things outside of what the story was trying to do. It's not that the story had an awful plot point, it's that the story was made by people who didn't have enough money. So the same thing kind of is interestingly true about Pocahontas as it relates to Moana. See, one of the things with these analyses of Pocahontas that we have is that Pocahontas is really quite a rubbish movie at depicting anything to do with American colonialism and Native Americans and the historical relationship between white colonists and Native American people, and largely everything that it tries to, that like superficially this movie is trying to be about, because it's really quite mediocre as an actual historical text. one might, if uncharitable, point out that this story also has a talking tree and a magical spell that makes people able to speak different languages and multiple musical numbers. So it's not like this story is itself necessarily taking its subject matter the way that we would do so looking at it now. But you know, it's still it's a very interesting thing to me to look at, because broadly speaking, media gets made with a purpose, and I grew up with genuine propaganda for a media landscape, like, you know, actual brainwashing stuff that people tried to make. So there's a certain insincerity and idiocy that you'll see if you look at that kind of actual stuff, the stuff that pretends that the people who are behind the other are, in some cases, downright, you know, manically evil, as opposed to what we have in Pocahontas, which, by all accounts, appears to have been made by well-intentioned ninnies. And do not mistake me, they were ninnies, and they should have known better, and they had every reason to know better, and that they didn't know better is a terrible indictment of the system for making these movies. They effectively, what happened is Pocahontas as a movie has one Native American friend, and it even if his idea and perspective was correct, it's not like he had enough power to completely steer the Disney machine. You know, you have sometimes the best intentions that are just in a hyper-scrutinized piece of media going to get sanded down into a very different kind of product. So there are a lot of problems with Pocahontas that are themselves extrinsic to the work. The work's biggest sin in a lot of ways is being made by people who thought they were making a story about actual Native Americans and the actual arrival of colonialism in Virginia. The story presented by Pocahontas, when you remove it from the context of it being about and named after an actual historical figure who really existed, becomes a little more cryptic. Because when you think about it, what values, what base assumptions does the story have? And there are a lot of them. This story is a story that does have values. It's got a view on things, and it's got a notional concept of culture. Ooh, okay, so this is, just to put a break on the Pocahontas talk, check this out. This creature is slightly larger looking than a single square. Technically it can only occupy one of them when it's stopped, and it turns around the second it stops. So it's barely got enough space to turn around, and technically it's the very far edge over there is very safe. So let's see if we can get over it when it comes back around. Hey! All that for 32 quid. But we'll need it if we want to get the ghost bonus. Anyway, so when you look at Pocahontas as a movie that was made, there's a couple of things that tie into the way it got made. It was a Disney product, for a start, which means that there was already a preemptive desire by the people making it to ensure that it was approachable. There was a conspicuous effort by people who didn't know anything about it to try and be inclusive. If you go back and you listen to the documentaries on this, there's some really interestingly, like, embarrassing and cringy conversations about why they chose to do things the way they did. So, one trope that you'll find if you go back into the really racist propaganda about Native American genocide, and indeed the general talk of like paper genocide that you actually have in Virginia. I think it's Virginia. It might be West Virginia. But the very real problem of people using a narrative about a culture against that culture is you were faced with, oh, okay, so again, pause on that talk. Here's a complication. This is a level we cannot get all the money on. We just can't. So the ghost bonus becomes irrelevant, and we start looking at things in terms of effort. We can't get any of the money because even with all the bombs, we can't break into there and get that security station to unlock, which will give us free access to this computer. So really, this is a smash and grab job, in which case, time to smash and grab. You know, you're not likely to get more than 2 computers, so hop, up and out we go. Alright, so the intrinsic story elements of Pocahontas, like the stuff that's inside the movie of Pocahontas that it wants to be about and it wants you to pay attention to, are things like proportionate responses to problems, and about an awareness and an association with your own environment, and like care for nature and stuff like that. A very mid-90s kind of racial diversity and environmentalism view. And that's... It lends in this position of, oh, that's nice, but... You know, very, oh, honey, no. The work of... the work of tireless racists like Walter Plecker, the mastermind of the Virginia paper genocide, framed all Native Americans as sexually promiscuous and available, which was part of a narrative he drove as a government minister to label the children of Native American families as colored, which under racist law in Virginia meant that they were subject to and excluded from a whole bunch of different things that Virginia was already doing to make life awful for black people. The argument was that blackness was so pervasive and corrupting that even a tiny bit of blackness in your family would effectively corrupt your entire family thereon. And this was, of course, also being done with literally no proof at all. Just the idea that if we can't track where the children are coming from in the most precise record-keeping way appropriate for Mr. Plecker, you just go with it. Just say it was a black man, because that was how he viewed both the Native Americans' idea of sex and the black communities of Virginia. This viewpoint, therefore, directly ties dehumanization and extermination of Native Americans to the sexual proclivities of usually their women. It's usually blamed on the women having sex with black men, which goes to show that there's an awful lot of American history that's just tied into being mad that that women are having sex with the wrong people. But that particular odiousness means, you know, I bring this up not because it's particularly lurid or anything, but to illustrate that there is a very strong association in American history with lies and dehumanizing myths being told about Native Americans and sexual availability. Like the idea that Native American women are easy, for lack of any better term, was part of what fueled this idea that drove a government policy that led to what we are now referring to as the paper genocides of Virginia, and have made life incredibly difficult for Native Americans trying to get access to land that they own, because the government can say, well, can you prove it to our standards? Which obviously they can't, because all the records were disposed at a certain point in Virginia, stained over with the idea of, these are not Native Americans, these are black people. So, that horrible little chunk of history was probably not anywhere near the minds of the animators who drew Pocahontas. But they did note, when they were talking about drawing Pocahontas, that she needed to be hot, because they said that they were dealing with a new, more adult view of Disney storytelling. This was about something important, and that meant that she needed to not be childish. So, Pocahontas is hot. Now, these two things dovetailing together, it's probably not intentional. It's much easier to believe, especially when it comes to the structures of racism and genocide, that the people who were not explicitly involved in the creation of and adherence to this policy were just ninnies. Like, that's one of the things that you will find. It takes a lot to decolonize your own mind and life, and that makes it really likely that if someone's doing something that's like structurally reinforces a problem, it's really likely that they literally did not know better, because part of the system is making so they don't have to know any better. Anyway, this is just one of many, many examples of the way that Pocahontas has all these things that, if you know more about anything involved, look and are really bad, but it's entirely possible that they were done by people who did not know any better. Now, this is not, again, to forgive this position or to render it a acceptable way to tell stories. We can do better. We do deserve better, and Moana does handle the Polynesian cultures it's dealing with better, at least if the people who I know of as experts in that particular field commenting on such things say so. Although there is also the equally good point that literally anything done by Disney is inherently tainted by the colonialism of capitalism, which, you know, at a certain point you wind up in conversations which just end up with someone saying, yes, but money exists. You have to choose where your lines get grey for, you know, at least a function. In the case of Moana, in the case of the storytelling of Moana, you have this story where almost all of its complaints are, well, almost all the great things it does are entirely intrinsic. There is nothing going on in Moana that is not very heavily scrutinized and very deliberately done. It's also really good. Even down to some stuff that I don't necessarily like that much. Like, I do feel that Tamatoa as a character was... Yeah, Tamatoa breaks the fourth wall and it annoys me. Like, it's a silly thing to get annoyed by, especially in a Disney movie, because Disney always has characters that break the fourth wall. It's hell, Disney musicals, by dint of being musicals, are inherently full of non-diegetic structures. So the idea that Jermaine Clements makes a joke about looking up decapods, it hurts this movie for me. Obviously, it doesn't really. It's just a pet peeve. In fact, here's a fun little puzzle for you, which I know Fox and I have hammered over. In which Disney movies can you find a diegetic song? That is to say, a song that in universe, with the music you hear and with the singers you hear, happens in the fiction of the universe. Not just like one thing you'll see happen fairly often is a character will start a line of a song, and then the music will pick up, and it'll seg into that character singing as if they are continuing the conversation they just had. But they're not hearing, like, diegetically, they don't seem to be hearing the music. The music does not appear to be a thing that exists in the same place as that character. The same thing is true of the same thing is true in most of these movies with the songs in general. But there are quite a few of them. So much so that Fox and I were really surprised to when we really know this out. We were surprised by how many of those movies have a diegetic song. Not necessarily all of the songs being diegetic, but at least one song which is actually a character actually singing to the actual people around them. Or the song that you're hearing on the soundtrack being a thing that is happening in the universe at the same time. Now, 101 Dalmatians has this. Cruella de Vil is a song that is recorded in that universe and is heard on the radio, and its presence in the story is, heck, it's a plot point. It's one of the more interesting examples of a diegetic song in a Disney movie. You have also in Aladdin, you have the instance of the genie, who does really, really weird things to the diegesis, because he's the genie. He can do whatever he wants, and that means that songs that feature just the genie as the central character, and indeed anyone interacting with the genie, probably diegetically happen. Like, there's no particular reason to suspect that Never Had a Friend Like Me doesn't happen. But on the other hand, Lion King, doesn't have anything in particular. There is, really interestingly, there is actually in Pocahontas a probably diegetic song. At the very start, you hear the Native American people, and I haven't memorized the name, so I'm not going to try and pronounce the group that I think they are, because I think I might be mixing up the name of the culture with the name of the language. But there's a sequence where there's a long, slow shot down the river, and there is music, and that music is made up of people singing aloud. And I learned from YouTuber Sideways, who I quite like, that these are called vocables, and they are not uncommon in this particular type of music in this particular culture. So that was cool. Yeah, it's probably safer to go down around here. The presence of an absent... The fact that vocables were what was used is interesting to me, because one of the things with diegetic music in stories is music itself carrying a long distance away from anything that could be causing it. Like, it's possible in movies like Hunchback that all the music is being performed diegetically, because you've got all these performers and players. But in a lot of cases, it's not, because the music is clearly not near anyone who's actually doing that. Like, God Help the Outcast, the music's coming from somewhere else. In the context of Pocahontas' song, however, those vocables are chosen and used because they travel so very far. They are themselves used as a cultural music, because they can be heard up and down the river, which I think is really cool. So that actually could be diegetic music in Pocahontas. But anyway, so getting towards the 25-minute mark. So before I wrap this up with this last swindle, one last job, man. Before I wrap this up, I did want to talk briefly about the values underpinning stuff in Pocahontas that we now think of as being fundamentally flawed. Because Pocahontas is not a movie about Native American people. It's a movie mostly about white American people, and not just in that assuage your guilt kind of colonialism wasn't that bad. That's stuff that I'm pretty sure exists in the story, because the people writing it didn't want to give everyone a complete downer that mentions that every character involved probably died of syphilis at some point. But rather, I think the reason it has the values it does is because it was concerned with things like a failure to respect the environment and a lack of care for the greater culture, rather than necessarily being about, oh hey, there's a route upward, cool, rather than necessarily being a story that was about some particularly good representation of the fiction of Pocahontas. I think a big part of this, the thing that makes this stand out in my mind, is how very, very 90s its solution to explaining the problem is in the song Savages. Now, if you've never heard this movie, it is a bit of a weird song. It's a bit of a trippy song to hear, because its framing is, what if the people who were genocided were just as unreasonable as the people committing genocide, which isn't an argument anyone should find compelling, but that's when you have the framing already in place that one of these two parties was the subject of genocide. Victim is kind of a tricky word in the context of genocide. I prefer subject, because it's not like they actually successfully got rid of them. The effort was made, but the Native American people refused.